You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 200 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Yes, another 100 episodes has gone past, and we've been all over the British Isles, from the north of Scotland to Cornwall and the Isle of Man to Sussex, and met farmers from pretty much every sector, from dairy to pigs, poultry, horticulture, cereals, potatoes, sheep, and beef. We've discussed the environment, politics, culture, new entrants, challenges, inputs, which has been a big one, of course, recently, policy, trade, and profiled some absolutely amazing personal stories. Mainly, I hope that we've championed some fantastic farmers, which is really what this podcast is all about. It's what I set out to do in 2016. I can't believe it's been that long. But yeah, we're here. So today, I thought that we'd take a look back through the archive at some of the last 100 episodes. And I'm not doing this by myself. I am really pleased to say that I'm joined by my brother in podcasting, the one and only Mr. Will Evans, who is an arable and beef farmer from North Wales, the current chair of the Oxford Farming Conference, Farmers Weekly Backpage columnist. I can just go on now. But he's also my co-host over on the Kite Podcast. Will, of course, started rock and roll farming round about the same time that Meet the Farmers started. There just wasn't anyone, when I was planning this episode and thinking what to do for this episode, there wasn't anyone who I wanted more to join me for this. So I hope this should be quite a lot of fun, Will.
That's lovely. Thank you, Ben. Of course, you've, as you mentioned, you've been all around the country recently, and now you've come to the centre of the known universe, Wrexham, which is the place to be at the moment. Exactly.
It is, for sure. So a little bit on you first. How's the spring workload going? And tell listeners, I mean, I'm sure they all know, but tell listeners a little bit about your farm.
The spring work is going okay. As everybody will know, in farming circles at the moment, we've had sort of every weather in the UK at the moment over the last week, apart from snow probably. So we've had flash floods and hot weather and all sorts. It's been crazy, but we're relatively up to date with things. Trying to get maize in the ground. We've got most of it in. We've got a little bit more to do. But yeah, as up to date as we ever are. Silage is looming. Terrifyingly, not ready for that yet, but not too far away.
As long as it's not underwater.
It's not underwater. No.
At the moment.
It's not underwater. Thankfully, if that block goes underwater, then we really are in trouble, because the house will be as well. But no, we're okay. The farm, mixed farm, lowland. We beef cattle, so we buy them all in as calves from mostly from neighbouring dairy farms, dairy bred cattle, take them right the way through to finishing. We have about 330 on the farm at the moment, and then we grow arable crops as well, a bit of all sorts. Do a bit of contracting. My children have some hens, 50 laying hens. Doesn't sound a lot, but it keeps them busy. And my wife has a polytunnel and grows organic vegetables, which she sells locally as well, which I've spent all weekend doing jobs for her in the tunnel. So it's been pretty full on lately.
Fantastic. Right, so I thought, so for this, we're going to pick out some of the examples, and it was so difficult, honestly. I went through pretty much every single episode again, which was a fantastic experience, actually, just to sort of pick out. So, but I thought these examples hopefully just go through some of the themes that have happened in the farming world in the last sort of 2.5 years or so. And we're going to start by going right the way back to episode 102, which actually featured you alongside Sally Williams, who was the then outgoing chair of the Oxford Farming Conference. And you had actually just become a director of the OFC at this point. And of course, Oxford was done virtually that year as well, which I found amazing, to sort of going back. So we're going back here to the heart of COVID as well. So listeners, just bear that in mind as well. And we'll sort of go back to your Oxford journey and talk about your Oxford journey after this. But let's go back to episode 102. 2 back at the beginning of 2021. I'm thrilled to be joined by Sally Williams, who was chair of the Oxford Farming Conference this year. She's also a dairy farmer from Scotland, and by a man who needs absolutely no introduction on this show, but I'm going to give him one anyway. The one and only Will Evans, an arable and beef farmer from North Wales, who does the occasional podcast in his spare time. And excitingly, as from today, he is officially a director of the OFC. Well, do I have the pleasure of being the first person to interview you as in that role?
I suppose you do, Ben. Yeah, it's quite terrifying, really. It sounds still all of a sudden.
Oh, well, thanks so much for coming on to you both. Sally, it's the 75th anniversary of the OFC. What was your initial reaction when it dawned on you that the conference would be done virtually this year?
Yeah, in a funny way, it's hard to remember because it's been such a long journey. When COVID hit, I remember confidently saying at our last face-to-face council meeting way back in February, March time that COVID would be gone by conference time. What on earth are we doing discussing the possibility of COVID not still being there? The country would be in a mess and the conference would be the least of our worries. And little did I know that we were pretty much going to be in lockdown for the next 9 months, and I was not going to set foot in Oxford again as an Oxford director, nor was I going to see any of my fellow colleagues face to face. But once realisation dawned, it was the morning of our council meeting. We were due to have a big discussion about the format and the programme. And I woke up that morning, heard on the news that things were getting worse, not better. It was supposed to be the end of the first lockdown. And I just had an epiphany and binned the agenda for the day. And we just discussed, right, what are we going to do?
You remember that time? And tell me about sort of your early time as a director and how the conference has changed over that time coming out of COVID.
Yeah, it's weird. It's funny enough, I'm just trying to write something for Farmers Weekly at the moment on around that time, COVID and lockdown. It feels like it was almost like it didn't happen, isn't it? It's quite strange. It's like some sort of surreal dream. But it was an odd time, and I felt so much for Sally and the other directors because they put so much effort. And as I know now, I mean, I said then it was terrifying, and it still is, even as a grizzled third-year veteran now, rather than a fresh-faced first-year director. You put so much time and energy into it. You know, we're all volunteers, and you're trying to do it around the rest of your day job and your family and everything else you have going on. So those 3 years are intense. You know, you put a lot of soul into it, a lot of heart and a lot of effort, and I felt so sorry for them that they had to do it online. But, you know, Sally is an incredibly talented and as you heard, very sort of pragmatic and resilient person, and just sort of took that decision and absolutely nailed it. And the online conferences, we had to do 2 online conferences, and they were both absolutely fantastic. And I thought the directors at that time handled it incredibly well. Yeah, it was difficult in that sort of first year when I obviously joined, as you said, at the heart of COVID. And Sarah Mukherjee and Barbara Bray were co-chairing the conference. They were fantastic, both of them, because we couldn't get together for most of that year. It was all done online. It was quite difficult like that, and you obviously miss out a lot on that human contact and some of the sort of fun aspects of it. But they did a brilliant job. I mean, we hoped then that year that we would be able to have it in person, and at the last minute we had to take the decision to do it online. But I think it worked quite well. But I'm very, very, very glad that we had our conference in person last year. Well, this year, 2020.
Exactly. Yeah, you'd rather not go back to that. And I mean, just absolutely very briefly, plans for next year. Are they developing? It's still a little way off.
It is a little way off, although it's terrifyingly midway through May already. So, it's funny with Oxford, a conference happens in January, and then you have about a week of reflecting and talking about what worked and what didn't, and then you're straight into planning for the following year. It's pretty intense. So we are, and usually for me, as you will know, Ben, because you organise me for the Kite Podcast. And listeners, I'm not exaggerating them. Ben sort of sorts everything out for me because I'm a bit chaotic. But we are quite well organised and quite on top of things. So we had our
busy
theme.
Is the word. Well, I think busy.
Busy, yeah, very busy. But we had our theme for next year planned already. I did luckily came up with the idea for that last year, so we were able to announce at the conference. So the theme of this year's conference, we have a different one every year, and next year will be the power of diversity. So we will be looking at diversity in all its forms. So diversity in people. So we'll be talking about how we attract people into farming. Well-documented labour crisis, obviously, at the moment. People from all kinds of different backgrounds. Whether that be first generation farmers, 10th generation farmers, people from non-farming backgrounds, whatever it may be. And we'll be looking at obviously biodiversity, the planet, environment, and then obviously diversity of business as well, and diversity of thought and diversity of leadership and ideas. So diversity in all its forms. It's really shaping up. We had a brilliant meeting the other day, came up with loads of ideas, and we've started sort of contacting speakers and things now. We've got some really potentially exciting speakers lined up if they come off. Some of them in particular, really, really big names. So yeah, that's it's exciting. We're kind of at the exciting bit. You have there's a lot of governance and admin and stuff behind the scenes, the unglamorous stuff that no one ever sees or appreciates, which is really, really important. But then when you get to ring people up and ask them, will you speak at the conference? And usually they're so sort of delighted and thrilled, that opportunity to stand on the stage at Oxford University, where so many famous people have stood and talk about what they're passionate about, is, being able to ask them to do that and hearing their response is always a bit of a thrill, really. So that's one of the main things I love about it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Talking of passionate people, let's go on to our next example. Fantastic farmer here, Abi Reader. Abi came on the show in episode 113, so we're going back to March 2021 here, and we spoke about a lot of things, but we spoke about TB quite a bit, and Abi spoke about the real life stories. I suppose that's what I want to focus on, and that's one of the things that we're big on the podcast. I know that you were big on rock and roll farming as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing that the podcasting scene in farming is good at, I think. And she spoke about her own story as well. And let's play this, and then we'll chat about TB a bit.
Okay, well, TB in Wales, talk about Wales as a whole. If you look at the figures that are being released by Welsh Government, they will say that new herd incidents are declining slightly. And I suppose length of breakdowns, variable. There's the figures released by Welsh Government, and then there's the real life sort of stories that you come across all the time. In the farming world in Wales, TB is really bad. It's the one thing that gets everybody rattled. It causes a lot of sadness, a lot of stress, not just for the farmers as well. I mean, for the vets who live through it with us, and for our nutritionists or anybody really who's dealing with the farm, they all live with you through it. It's particularly bad. So Wales is divided into 3 zones. There's the low incidence area, the intermediate, which is what I'm in, and the high risk area. So there's a high risk area, particularly down in the southwest of Wales. And some people there have been in and out of TB for 16 years. I have had my own experience of TB breakdown, probably going into my 3rd year now, on and off. Okay. Never experienced it before that. We'd had almost a 10-year history of being able to prove that we were TB clear, and suddenly we went down with it. During that time, in my first breakdown, I lost 13 animals, and I'm in the middle of my second breakdown now. 5 animals have gone already. I was saying to a farmer in England the other day, in England, you have the Badger Cull areas, which are all that, despite what the press might portray to the public, these are very well controlled areas. There is a lot of work that goes into these Badger Cull areas. People just don't go running out the countryside with a gun because they want to have fun. There's a lot of science that goes into this, and it is backed by Natural England. Yep. We don't have that in Wales. There's no help coming. Nobody seems to care.
That was March 21. That was more than 2 years ago. And I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts, certainly in Wales, on this. But it doesn't really feel like we've moved forward at all, really.
No, it doesn't. And Abi is she's such a brilliant communicator and leader. I think we're very lucky to have her in farming and particularly in Wales. I mean, I agree with everything that Abi said. So we live northeast Wales on the border with England, and it's pretty bad around here. It's bad in Wales, and it's bad across in North Shropshire and South Cheshire as well. It is slightly different in England, as Abi said. It hasn't got any better. If anything, it's got worse. I mean, one of our immediate neighbours has actually just gone down with a really bad breakdown again. One of my best friends has just gone out of milk. I could get quite emotional about it, but he's a brilliant guy. He's the same age as me. We were in school together. Left school like I did at 16 to go and milk cows. At the time, we used to be a dairy farm as well, and he quite a small farm, milking only probably about 120 cows, always immaculate, always when you drive past the farm, it just looks great. The kind of farm where they know the cows by name, very much a family operation. The kind of farm I think that the public and policymakers and everybody likes to think of as a dairy farm, very quite not particularly intensive, just and they've just decided after over a decade of repeated TB breakdowns that that they've had enough. And I think there are other factors as well, but I think that sort of sword constantly hanging over them, and losing cows, losing heifers all the time, and not being able to move forward properly. I don't think you can underestimate the emotional pressure that puts on people. I can't actually think of anything comparable. It's a horrific situation. I've been with so many dairy farmers who've, they can barely get the words out when they talk about it. It's, I'm sure we're going to go on to talk about mental health, Ben, but I mean, there can't be many things damaging farmers' mental health more than TB. And as Abi said, I'm afraid, no one does seem to care. Government, there's always lots of warm words about it in Wales, and they'll sort of signpost mental health charities and things like that at the beginning of meetings about TB, which kind of says it all. But they will not budge on doing anything about it, and there just seems to be sit and wait for a vaccine. But we've been promised that for years, and it doesn't. God knows when that's going to arrive. So yeah. Not wishing to bring them down. It's a pretty depressing situation, really.
Yeah, no, I go along with everything you're saying there, and I hope that we'll be having this conversation in episode 300 and not be having the same thing again. But I feel we probably will. Next, we're going to move across the Atlantic. So in these 100 episodes, I haven't done many more of these. I wanted to do more international episodes, but this was a trip across the States. And I spoke to Bill Northey, who is a farmer in Iowa, corn and soybeans, along with most other Iowa farmers. He's also a former Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation at the USDA, US Department of Agriculture. So this was an interesting one. And here he's speaking about carbon, which is another issue that we cover all over the place. I think this is midway through 2021.
And certainly the folks in the administration right now are talking about carbon all the time.
Yeah,
it is sustainability, it's climate. I just saw a press release for a program that we've had out a long time, EQIP. It's a good conservation program. It definitely has some benefits for water quality and wildlife, but also for carbon sequestration. Carbon was mentioned in that release 13 times.
Okay.
Or climate was mentioned in that release 13 times, and it really isn't much different than releases that we did at the same time when we hardly mentioned climate. But that's the focus now. There's also equity and conversations about the impact of race and those kinds of things. Those are a challenging thing to work through. But I really do think carbon, sustainability, what that looks like, that's actually what I'm now spending a lot of my time on, is talking about, as I came back and tried to figure out whether I was going to find a job or consulting or other kinds of things. A bunch of folks said, well, we could use a little help thinking through sustainability in our organization, whether it's an ag company or an association or a group of farmers. And so I'm helping folks through that as we're all trying to figure out exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big issue for all of us, whether it's selling carbon credits, whether it's producing, net zero beef or milk or corn, because somebody's willing to pay extra for that versus, product that doesn't have a score on it.
So I've certainly found over these 100 episodes, compared to the first 100 episodes, that I've been having this conversation far more. I wondered, so if you go back to rock and roll farming, can you remember if there was a sort of point where this topic just started to become more mainstream, I suppose? Because it's been there for a long time, obviously. But have you been having these conversations more in the last, I suppose, 2-3 years?
Yeah, much more. And we talk about it a lot on the Kite Podcast, don't we, Carbon?
All the time,
it comes up a lot. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Until sort of a few years back, probably hadn't even thought about carbon since bloody chemistry lessons in school, but in the early 90s. But it's something that dominates conversation now, isn't it? And something I think about a lot. I'm part of a group in Wales Net Zero 2035, and it's sort of a group of people from all over Wales from different sectors that Jane Davidson, former MS, has been asked to put together, and we're sort of exploring ways of how Wales could potentially get to net zero by 2035. It's a challenge. I mean, we know we're looking at food production. How could Wales feed itself by 2035? How could we build new buildings that are carbon neutral by 2035? All those kind of different aspects, and it's an enormous challenge when you start looking into it and all the different factors that influence it. I mean, I'm positive we can do it, but it's difficult, and we talk about it a lot. Obviously, in farming, we're at the forefront of it, aren't we? I mean, we're trying very hard on the farm to decarbonize our operation. I mean, I'm trying to think of how we can get to net zero on our farm, just our farm business, and that's challenge enough. Though I think we can do that probably more easily than I would have thought if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago. And I think, price of fertilizer over the last few years has only kind of sharpened people's minds on that, hasn't it? But yeah, it's certainly something I think about a lot with farming. I mean, you must talk to people about this all the time, Ben. I expect barely a day goes past without you having a conversation about carbon.
No, it's completely that. It's been one thing I would like to see, and I think that certainly in the mainstream press, is that it does still feel like, and I know we're biased, but it does still feel like ag and I suppose the rural space it does seem to be suffering in terms of the blame game more than perhaps it should. I would like to see more emphasis placed on what we do about sustainable transport, what we do about sustainable tourism, and actually bring that more into the debate. Because I think, I genuinely think it feels like we can never do enough. So yes, we still need making ground, but also think we also have a responsibility to make that case that everyone needs to be doing the same, and we need to be telling those stories cross sector to each other, so that it doesn't feel like, because even that might not be the reality. For me, that's the perception that people in the farming world maybe feel like they are taking on a heavier burden. I don't know. I'm going for a tangent.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely go along with that. I think there's a lot of sort of laziness around the simple messaging, isn't there, around this, and kind of whataboutism. And yeah, it's frustrating because it's as you've just said, it's an incredibly complex thing. None of us, no single individual or single farmer or single industry can get there on our own. We've got to work together, and that starts with having honest conversations about where the emissions are coming from and what we can do about it, isn't it? And we can do it, but we've just got to be honest about it and try and work together, I think.
This episode is being supported by our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. Why did I want to collaborate with A-Plan Rural? Well, having got to know them, their team shares my passion for giving a voice to farmers and we are both driven to raise the profile of farming voices to a wider audience. So it seemed quite a good fit. Quite frankly, together we will be able to do a lot more. A-Plan Rural do a lot of work on social media themselves, sharing farming accounts and farming stories. They have a rural community blog which shares farmers' experiences, and they also support a growing number of initiatives that champion UK farmers, including this podcast. So a big thank you to A-Plan Rural for supporting Meet the Farmers. Right, let's move on. Gosh, it was so hard to pick these examples, honestly, and there is so much that there are going to be so many things that listeners are going to be like, why didn't you include this? But we can't include everything. I'm going to jump ahead to someone who actually you and I also interviewed on the Nature Friendly Farming Network podcast, Chris Clark. And here we're just talking more about, Chris is a really interesting character, but we're talking more about the business aspect of farming here. And here he talks about putting nature on the balance sheet and seeing it as a shareholder in your business. Let's see what you think of this.
One of the reasons that nature and farming are inextricably linked is that farming is either the only industry or one of very few industries that rely on free issue. What do I mean by free issue? Every farm business will get free sunshine, free rain, free fertility, free grass. So there's an element of what you do as a farmer that you get for nothing. If farmers had to pay for that free issue, it would be expensive and would make farm businesses even less viable than they are now. So nature is giving us this. And what we should be doing is driving that asset, that free issue asset, making that as valuable as we can make it. And if someone in business gives you something, they generally expect something back in return. Nature doesn't expect anything back in return. It just expects that it's looked after and enhanced or worked in a way that doesn't disadvantage it. And so that makes nature a stakeholder, a shareholder in our farm business.
Yeah, Chris is great, isn't he? That sort of nature as a stakeholder in your business is such a great line. As you said, you and I interviewed him for the Nature Friendly Farming Network podcast, and apart from him refusing to have a bath with you, Ben,
I'm never going to live that down.
which still makes me laugh, and listeners will have to check that out for yourself to see what context that was meant in. But
it's the first thing he always says to me whenever I see him.
Is it? Well. Brilliant.
Yeah, bath yet.
But yeah, he's just a really good way of putting it. Is a very, very, very good farmer and interesting guy. And yeah, it's something I suppose we've all thought about a lot. And I'm a little bit, I've talked about this before, but a little bit sort of poacher turned gamekeeper with this kind of things, because I couldn't growing up. I was only interested in sort of tractors and cows, and I couldn't have been less interested in nature. I wasn't interested. I just never thought about it. But it just wasn't on my radar at all. Wasn't necessarily brought up like that. Very much sort of brought up in that kind of production farming way, through the sort of 80s and 90s. And then, my dad had, through this grown up his farming career through 60s, 70s, and 80s. That sort of produces as much food as you can as efficiently as possible. So, it's only in recent years really where I've kind of, sounds probably grander than it is, but rediscovered nature and the environment. I suppose we've all become a bit more environmentally aware, and I've begun to see, as Chris says, it's not just about, for me, it's been a multiple layered thing. It's been good for me in terms of mental health. I've enjoyed doing that kind of stuff, planting new hedges, and then seeing that, we've got a lot more birds around the farm in recent years and things like that. It's been good for me. But, in terms of a balance sheet, we've done quite a lot of things where I think have helped massively in that regard. We've undersowed our maize crops for the last 4 years with grass, which was quite a big decision because, you have to buy the grass seed. You don't know whether it'll have an effect on the yield of the maize. It was something we had to sort of think quite carefully about. Tenant farmers don't have a huge amount of spare cash, but, it's worked really, really well. We were able to put sheep on it in the winter. We're keeping the soil in the field. It's not going down the river. Just feel quite simple interventions like that have made a big difference to the profitability of the business as well. So, and there's loads of farmers who are doing far, far more than me on this kind of thing. You have to go to Groundswell in June to see that. And my good friend Ben Taylor Davis down in Ross and Wine, fellow OFC director, I've been to his farm a couple of times. What he's doing there is absolutely incredible. It really shows what can be done with farmers and the environment. It's mind blowing, actually. So yeah, I think Chris is quite an inspirational guy, actually, and always good to hear him talk.
Yeah, completely. I think as the other side of what Chris was saying, one thing that, of course, has dominated in the last 18 months or so has been cost of inputs and how inflation, agflation has impacted the sector. There were several examples for later on, which I thought I could bring in this, but I thought I'll bring this in now because it links into, I suppose, the variable cost side of Chris's model. And of course, as one thing that's been interesting to see actually has been certainly as the cost of fert has gone up, and the cost of inputs generally, it's how farmers of all types, in all areas, it seems, have been looking at their business models and thinking about how they can change. Has that been something that you've observed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the conversations around it have been, you're sort of seeing farmers who certainly on social media who, I don't know if there's such, I never like the phrase conventional farmer. I mean, I'm fairly conventional myself. Whatever that means, but farmers who wouldn't be sort of consider themselves regenerative or anything like that are now looking at changes that you never thought they would. There's an awful lot of farmers. I always find it quite funny that where sort of people are talking about bringing livestock back onto farms, arable farms, as if they found this sort of, they've worked this sort of thing out that no one's ever thought of before. Always makes me laugh as a sort of growing up sort of through the 90s when we were a mixed farm and it was seen as terribly unfashionable and kind of something out of the olden days, so it always makes me smile a little bit. But yeah, people are obviously looking to use FYM a lot more on those kind of traditional farms that for perhaps a long time were just sort of wheat and oilseed rape. They're looking at bringing in grass again and getting sheep on the farm over winter and things like that. It's funny, isn't it? I suppose if you're going to find a silver lining with the massive increase in cost of fertilizer last year, I suppose it's that, isn't it? The fact that people are now sort of starting to think a bit more out of the box and looking at different solutions and hopefully, finding better ways forward for their business.
Yeah, absolutely. FYM is farmyard manure for any non-farming listeners out there.
Yeah,
look, we're going to turn. It's all about the acronyms.
It is.
I've become so much more conscious of this now, so I've got to think about when I see them. We're going to turn towards policy now, and we're going to go back to episode 138 with Janet Hughes. So we're into 2022 now. This is May 22, and this is Janet talking about starting at DEFRA. And really what I wanted to do with this, because it is Meet the Farmers, it sort of went through a stage where I thought, okay, rather like you did rock and roll farming, although it worked much better, I think, with rock and roll farming than it does with Meet the Farmers. I went and spoke to people outside of farming, but still in the sector. And this, I wanted to really show that civil servants are still human. Yeah, so this is Janet talking about her time.
Even politicians are still human. Even the politicians.
Exactly. Okay. So all that came together, and then you ended up at DEFRA. How did that happen? How did you come to work in DEFRA?
I did a few different things at Government Digital Service. I spent a couple of years working on identity assurance and how you prove your identity without turning up somewhere in person, which turns out is very complicated. I did a few other things too. And then I left in 2016, and then I was contracting for a while, just on my own, doing working with various different bits of government and also charities and other organisations. Look where they were, and the question they were all thinking was, how do we make our organisation fit for a digital age? And so I was advising leadership teams on that, and I also got involved in delivery. I did some time in NHS Digital, working on digital delivery there, and also other bits of government. And then I landed in Department for Education, and actually what I was doing there was trying to set up a portfolio of their major delivery projects They have a whole load of delivery projects there, building schools, refurbishing schools, recruiting teachers, setting up apprenticeships, all sorts of things. And the department wanted to get more of a delivery focus. And they asked me to come in and work with all the people running those projects to set up that portfolio, make sure it was working properly. But I'd hardly, and I became a proper civil servant instead of a contractor while I was there. And I literally just signed the contract when DEFRA put a call out for people to come and help with the delivery for Brexit, because DEFRA is one of the departments which has a large number of things to do as a result of Brexit, lots of new services to build and operate. And so I pitched up to help a bit here and there, and then I helped a bit more, and then I ended up spending actually all of my time here and no time in DFE. Yep. And then so I came over here permanently in, I can't remember when it was, 18 months ago now. So I've been here for 3 years in DEFRA. Okay. But the first year and a half, I was working on Brexit. Then I spent a few months working on COVID and getting food to vulnerable people. And now I'm here in the Futuring Farming Programme. So I just I never had a plan for my career at all. I've just pursued things that I'm interested in and the communities that I connect with, and then sort of found my way into roles that suit me, if you see what I mean.
Janet Hughes there. And here, I literally just wanted to say about Janet, really, because people say what they like about DEFRA and Brexit and everything that's come in sort of the policy landscape. It's been a huge change in policy landscape since. But then again, this is me speaking personally now, but I think Janet's drive as an individual in that department made a massive difference at the time.
Huge, yeah. I've met Janet and she's great. She's just as lovely in person as she comes across. She came across then in that clip. She's someone who cares very passionately about what she does and farmers and the community. I think sometimes we're all guilty of that, aren't we? Forgetting that, we all get frustrated with politics and policy and government departments and, but most people do care and are trying very hard to do their job and are in it for the right reasons. I always admired her patience, I guess, and her willingness to put herself out there on social media. It's quite a brave thing to do, to put yourself out there to answer questions and be available on social media of all places where the algorithms are literally, you know what Twitter's like. It's literally designed to make people angry, and doesn't it do that?
Oh yes.
But her sort of willingness to put herself out there on Twitter and answer those questions to a community that's often frustrated and struggling, and therefore can be quite het up sometimes, and I think is really, really admirable. And people can sort of question DEFRA and politicians often quite rightly, and I do it myself regularly. But I think it gives you more confidence that people like Janet are involved.
That's literally all I wanted to say. I think probably about this sort of side of things, because it's just part of the story that we just don't often acknowledge. But similarly, over the next 100 episodes, over the next 2.5 years or so, 2 years, it'll be fascinating to see how policy in the various four corners of the UK shapes out. Where are we going next? Yeah, so in these 100 episodes, I introduced the final two questions of the show, which have been fascinating, actually. So I ask everyone to give a message to the public and a message to farmers, as simple as that. And loads of examples I could have picked out, but the one I chose was from another Welshman. We've got quite a lot of Welsh people on this, actually, but Ioan Humphreys. And this was in August 20.
Because so many of us are farmers, but
we always finish the show with the same two questions. The first is, what is your message for the public?
Support local farmers. I support your local farmer. If you live in Birmingham, don't go to Aldi's and buy my eggs off the shelf. Go to your local shop or go to the market and buy their egg. Buy home produce, because the supermarkets are putting so much money. They're making so much money on my eggs. My eggs are currently in Aldi and Asda. If I'd rather you come to me and buy them. than give the supermarkets that money. My message to the public is support your local farmers. Don't go out buying from all the major supermarkets, because they don't care about you. They don't care one bit. They don't care about you, and they don't care about us that are farming. If you go to the farmer, a farmer would appreciate you coming and buying things local. I know I would. If you came up to me and said, "Oh, can I buy some of your eggs?" I'm like, "Yep, of course you can. How many would you like?" So, yeah.
And your message for farmers?
Message for the farmers: be kind. Be kind to each other. Help each other out. Help your neighbour. Help each other out. There's enough negativity in the world already. Help. If your neighbour breaks down, give him a hand. If you've fallen out with your neighbour over a fence, just go and shake his hand. We all need, as an agricultural community, we need to be together, work together, help each other. I just want everyone to be friends. I just want a massive friend hug of all farmers. I just want
big farmer hug.
Big farmer hug. Yeah. I just think what is the point in arguing and being jealous, and no one cares. No one genuinely, no one really cares. It's just everyone's trying to make a living, and if you're trying to make a living in different ways, that doesn't matter. Just help each other out. Be kind.
Ioan Humphreys, and Ioan was at the centre of another big issue in farming for the last 2 years, which was, of course, the egg crisis, and the distribution of price. Supply chain reviews, etc., has been a big topic, which is still ongoing. And actually, this week, the week we're recording this in, we've actually there's Rishi Sunak's Food Security Summit as well going on. But I'm really interested, Will, in your take on, I suppose, how this conversation is being had between different parts of the industry, including the supermarkets. And again, here, because it's what we do on this podcast, I'm talking more on a human level here.
So my wife, Sarah, is reading Henry Dimbleby's new book at the moment.
Oh, yeah. It's actually on my desk at the moment as well.
Yeah. So I think she's just finished it. So I haven't had to read it because she's sort of shouted out facts from it, all the time to me when I've been trying to do other things. But, I think it's a really, really interesting read on this. I'm not 100% confident, actually. Well, in fact, I'm very unconfident that anything will change with supermarkets. But it all comes down to, we've got 4 young children, and we think a lot about their diets at the moment. And they've just introduced free school meals for younger primary school children in Wales. Now, you'd think that was a good thing, wouldn't you? Right? It's brilliant.
Yeah.
The food system. So we'll talk a lot about the broken food system, and yet in sort of parent Facebook groups and things we're in, or WhatsApp groups, a lot of the parents have gone nuts about it because their children won't eat the kind of fresh food that the schools are trying to provide. The kids will only eat chips or right. junk food. And how do you get around that? I suppose where I'm going at this in my very rambly fashion, Ben, is it's not just supermarkets to blame. We've all got take a bit of responsibility with our diets and our health, haven't we? And I think it's such a complex and big subject, on health and food. And you look at how different it is in places like Italy and France, and the kind of diets they have, and then the sort of processed food, and how we're all kind of manipulated into, and I'm as bad as anyone else. I'm not a saint with this, but it's a difficult one. It covers a lot of that in Henry Dimbleby's book, that sort of broken food system we have in Britain. And I suspect it's something we could talk about for a couple of hours. But there's a lot of different factors to that conversation.
Yeah, I'm predicting as well. I think that food and health conversation is going to be quite central, I think, to the conversations that are being had over the next few years. I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, well, you look at the the amount of diabetes and sort of diet related illnesses that are, the NHS is already struggling, isn't it? So it's something that government are going to have to make some pretty tough decisions on, I think.
Yeah, so one of my favourite guests over the last 100 episodes, and I know you shouldn't have favourites, but this was one of those where he's such a good speaker, and it was a thrill to have him on the show. Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones, he came on in September of last year, and Wilfred's story, if you haven't already listened to this one, listeners, please scroll back to episode 169 and listen to this one. In this section, he talks about attitude and mindset. He talks elsewhere about the courage to be bold, but there are so many good learning points just for life and think in general from Wilfred, let alone in farming.
So in all of the time that I was living my life and doing all these different things, the one purpose that always kept me driving and motivating forward was to one day own my own farm. Yep. It kept me absolutely focused. And I absolutely fundamentally believe that you need to have in the back of mind your personal purpose, and everything you do needs to be actually aimed towards fulfilling that personal purpose. So I when I interview people for jobs, and I've just done a series rounds of interviews at the moment, the question that always flummoxes them is when I say, what is your personal purpose? Because most people don't know. I said, I'm not really interested in employing somebody because for a job, they need to be thinking, well, this job is here to help me fulfill my personal purpose. And that's more than just putting bread on the table. It's got to be something deeper than that.
Honestly, I mean, I could have, for this whole episode 200, I could have just listened to Wilfred, really. Yeah, Will, your sort of your thoughts on this in terms of there's a whole sort of wing of podcasting where this kind of conversation is had. How do you see mindset? And we're not talking about mental health here, I suppose, but we're talking about mindset in farming. Is it a topic that is actually spoken about? Because I feel like we're on the cusp of it, but most farmers don't really see themselves in that sort of light. Although there have been definitely, Pasture Pod miniseries on time. It's been fantastic recently. Michael did an amazing job with that.
Yeah, it's had a big effect on me, that series. Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot, and I guess in Britain we're not very good at this, are we? Because we're naturally quite cynical, aren't we? So exactly. And unlike sort of the Americans are always really good at it, aren't they? That sort of positivity message. Yeah. You can do it, and that sort of, I suppose that comes from that sort of pure capitalism mode, really, and the American dream of everybody can be president. But in the UK, where we're a bit more, perhaps a bit more cynical and weather beaten, it doesn't work so much. But although having said that, I mean, just over the Irish Sea, the Positive Farmers Conference has been going on for a number of years, hasn't it? So
yeah, that's true.
Obviously that's in Ireland, but I think we are getting better at it. I mean, I quite like that kind of thing. Those kind of simple messages are something that works quite well for me. I have a few sort of on my phone that those kind of everyday messages, just little reminders, I think are quite good for me. So yeah, what Wilfred was saying there resonated quite a lot. That sort of, I suppose that, you mentioned that the Pasture Pod series there, it's realizing that sometimes in the everyday rush of things, and we're all short-staffed and under pressure. I mean, remember in those heady days of COVID where we said after COVID, we'll all have better work-life balance, and I think it's actually worse than ever now. But feel like everybody's under pressure. But I think it's just realizing that lots of small changes can add up to something big. So I've been trying to getting into some daily habits, just little, very small things, very unexciting things, but just kind of doing those things and allowing myself a little bit more space I think is helping me a little bit. So yeah, I think that sort of positivity and dare I say mindfulness aspect, I think is something that farmers are getting better at, realizing that you don't have to define yourself by working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to be a proper farmer. You can, there are many different ways of being a proper farmer, and you've just got to find what works for you, I guess.
Yeah. Now, probably the most powerful episode for me over the last 100 episodes was with O-Sullivan, formerly Picton-Jones, of the DPJ Foundation, founder of the DPJ Foundation. Mental health is something that we've both covered a lot in various facets. So we're going to talk about mental health in a bit, but first of all, here is Emma on episode 171.
As far as I was concerned, if he was talking to somebody about what was going on in his head, then that was great.
Yeah.
So we went up there, and he didn't come home, basically. He rang at 2:00 in the morning, and I was just like, where are you? Come home. He's like, oh, I'm just going to go to my mum's. I was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, it's 2:00 in the morning. And he was looking after the children the next day. And I remember him just going, you know what, I really love you. And I was like, yeah, like, whatever, come on, just come home, don't be stupid. I just thought, what? I was half asleep, like, didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And that was the last time I ever spoke to him. I woke up in the morning of July the 5th and couldn't find him. And so, yeah, that kind of was the start of where everything really went very, very downhill very quickly, because I knew something was wrong. I don't know why. I can't explain the feeling that I had, which was just completely in my gut, which told me this is bad, like really bad. I remember ringing round, and I was supposed to go to school, and I couldn't go into work because I had to find him. And I just knew that whatever was going on was just, it was something in my head told me this is going to end horrendously. So I jumped in his truck, because he went in my car the night before, and I drove up to where he was brought up on. He's brought up in a small holding, and I went and drove up there, and I drove down the corner and around, and I was greeted by a row of police cars. And I just remember this policeman coming up to me and just saying, I'm really sorry. And I was like, well, what are you sorry about? Like, why are you sorry? And he was like, Daniel's dead. He hung himself on the tree outside where we had lived. We lived there for a short time, and he'd gone there. He hadn't gone to his mum's, like he said. He'd gone straight there, and he took the decision to end his life.
It's a tough lesson, isn't it?
It always is. Yeah. And Emma is, in all the people in the ag world, she's one of those people who inspires me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from great hardship comes amazing hope. And what she's created, the DPJ Foundation, is unbelievably fantastic and is changing so many lives. But the story generally with mental health, which everyone's story is different.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm most pleased about over the last, if we look at the 2.5 year period, it does seem to be getting better. I think there's still more to do there. I think I'd really hope there aren't people out there who are still, at least don't know what to do or how to talk about it or who to talk to. But I think we're in a better place than we have been. But unfortunately, there are still people in Daniel's shoes out there, which is not good enough in my mind. We need to do more still.
Yeah, I think we'll always need to do more, won't we? But I think it's massively changed. So I remember sort of back in the early days of when I was doing rock and roll farming, we did a couple of early episodes on mental health, and it seemed a really big deal at the time. Yeah, and some of them had got hundreds of messages and emails afterwards, from all around the world, from people who'd sort of just saying, hearing that conversation, they'd never heard it talked about before, and it helped them and all that kind of thing. And I think now it is much, fast forward sort of 5-6 years, I think those conversations are more normal, more mainstream. Obviously they're still important, and we have to keep talking about it because you never know who's listening. I did a presentation at Lincolnshire Farming Conference earlier this year about mental health, and which is always a weird. It's quite as you will know, Ben. It's not easy talking about mental health, is it? Your own problems you've had. It's quite difficult to do, but you know that it will help somebody. You know that it will help them, and therefore, if something good can come out of something bad, then that's a positive, isn't it? So yeah, I think the conversation has moved forward, but as you've said, there's a long way to go, and we all know somebody who's struggling in farming. we all know somebody who's had serious issues, and it's as we talked about earlier with TB and all these other issues we're facing, cost of living crisis. I suspect, sadly, that it's not going to get much better anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think all we can do in the farming common space is just keep profiling those stories and keep saying, just talk, keep talking, keep the conversation going. So another big theme from the last 2 years in terms of conversations and that shift in the industry has, of course, been 2 words which you can't get away from now, which is regenerative agriculture and the shift towards that. Here's Russ Carrington talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, before every guest comes on, I always ask, A, if there's anything specific they want to talk about, and B, what they think sort of the biggest challenges, I suppose, that we currently face are. And one thing that you said was mindset shift. And I suppose building on what you've just said there, what do you specifically mean by that in the current context that we find ourselves in?
I think, take beef, for example, and how to graze them. Traditionally, or in fact, lots of farmers would put their animals out into fields and let them graze in a field for a few weeks, and then maybe move them to the next field, or leave them out in the fields all summer and then bring them into the barns at winter. I don't think that not everyone's doing that now, but certainly in the norm, and it's still going on a lot. And then what I've been doing is moving those animals every day to a fresh paddock, and I've been putting up electric fencing. To a lot of people, that looks like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And this is madness, because you're spending time, labor costs are expensive, and why would you do that? And I get it asked on every farm tour. I've done it now. And it gets, we all get, those of us doing it, we all get asked about it a lot. But then it's about thinking, well, how the mindset shift is actually understanding how those grazing herbivores are interacting with the grassland ecosystem, as they do in the wild, in the Great Grassland Plains of the Serengeti or Great Plains in North America, where there's a symbiotic relationship between grazing herbivores and grass plants and the way that they interact. And that's about being partially grazed, but also then rested, dung and urine from the animals onto the pasture, exciting the soil biology. And I'm really kind of abbreviating it all, but it's a bit to get your head around. And then the other aspect is actually, if moving those animals on a daily basis, you can then extend your grazing season from 6 months to 9 months. And I did that here. We at NEP, we've been housing the cattle just for short winter, but by reducing your winter housing costs in half is really significant. And it makes that extra bit of time each day really worth it. And I suppose it's getting your head around that holistically and thinking about, this is how the animals are interacting with the pasture. I'm getting the best of my land by helping the soil to work well and farming the soil life as much as anything. And then thinking about the impact on costs. What happens with the mindset shift is that, people are used to their comfort zones and what they know works in a particular way. When that's challenged, either through a crisis or, for example, the withdrawal of BPS payments, that's actually causing people to think, right, we need to really rethink our business models. There's I think a process, a kind of psychological process that looks a little bit like the Kubler-Ross model for dealing with grief.
Huge amount in there, and we have already touched on the shift to regen. So won't cover too much on this, but just thoughts generally. I thought on, do you think that we talk about regen ag too much on podcasts and in the farming commerce space in terms of sort of the reality on the ground?
That's an interesting question. It's difficult, isn't it? So I went to Groundswell in, I want to say 2018, I think it was, and it was just like a few tents in a field, and kind of it seemed a little bit out there. And then I went last year, and we had a beer together there, didn't we? And it's like Glastonbury Festival. It was massive.
Yeah.
And
I can't wait for next month. Yeah.
No, nor can I. So it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because it's that odd thing of social media, and there's a lot, you see, if you follow social media, you'd think every farmer in the country was like looking in this direction.
Exactly.
But I'm thinking about a lot of my sort of farming friends and neighbours. I don't know if it's as much on their radar.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. But then I was just reading an article the other day about Guinness. I've just been to Dublin and Ireland and drank a lot of Guinness, and went to the Guinness brewery and really enjoyed it. And I was reading in there about they're doing a 3-year trial in Ireland about potentially sourcing all of their barley that they use. And you can imagine how much barley Guinness use in a year from regenerative farming. So,
wow.
The direction of travel, if you start getting 1 or 2 companies going in that direction, then, they all will. So, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Just a little more about our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. They provide bespoke insurance cover for farms and estates. This could be for anything from tractors and machinery to a new exciting diversification venture. So for more information, visit aplan.co.uk/rural. That's aplan.co.uk/rural. I'm conscious of your time, so we're going to start wrapping this up. And I thought of all the episodes together, that we're moving forwards here. I wanted to bring in Jess Langton, who is a fantastically inspiring part of a new generation coming through in ag. This is Jess Langton, dairy farmer.
Policy takes a long time. We are essentially the next generation of farming, but let's say policies take sort of 5, maybe 10 years to go through. We need to be the people driving these, as there's a good chance that we'll be the people farming when these things come into place. Like Brexit happened years ago now, but we're still waiting for the definitive replacement for BPS. So we need those young people driving these sorts of things, as these are the things that we've got to learn to farm with in the future. And I think the more involved you get from a younger age, the more you broaden your own knowledge, and you learn about the challenges, you learn about the opportunities, and you learn about the way that you could shape your farm to sort of become in line with the future of agriculture. For example, at the minute, I think the hot topic is sustainability. So we've got countryside stewardship, we've got the sustainable farming incentive, but we do need to tackle things like methane, animal health and welfare. We have the fantastic standards across the UK, but there's always ways where you could go further.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Jess, and she is a really inspiring figure. And I just wanted to finish with this because for all the doom and gloom out there, for all the challenges, for all the stories, certainly within the next generation of recruiting and bringing in new people, and yes, all those challenges exist. And yes, we have to talk about them, and yes, we have to find solutions to them if we can. But remaining positive is so important, isn't it? And it's so important to profile. That's what I'm trying to do more of now, is profiling those stories of younger farmers doing really exciting things and who are so determined coming through from the grassroots.
Yeah, I mean, I was smiling throughout that because isn't that sort of enthusiasm brilliant? And Jess is right. We need people to step up and influence change. And I mean, I've got involved with obviously some wider industry things over the last few years, and you have to get beyond that imposter syndrome, which is very difficult to do. And tell yourself that you belong there. I mean, the reason why I applied to be an Oxford Farming Conference director, and I am just a tenant farmer from Wrexham. I did, pretty working class background, and you might think, what on earth am I doing there? Well, the reason is that farmers need to be, people like me, normal working farmers need to be, because those conversations about policy that affect all our lives, all our everyday lives, and our businesses and our families are happening anyway, whether farmers are in the room or not.
Yeah.
So we have to be there. We have to be there, and we have to put ourselves in those conversations. We have to kick down those doors and be in the rooms. And I mean, I'm a 44-year-old man who's sort of midway through my career. I'm pretty tired and exhausted, but hearing Jess's enthusiasm and drive, those are the people especially that we need in the rooms, much more than me. So just brilliant. I really enjoyed hearing her message, because we can all influence change. We just have to make ourselves do it.
Well,
Well, I'm so grateful for you coming on the show and doing this. It's been so good. But before we go, I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everyone. What is your message for the public, first of all?
This is quite a hard one, isn't it? Because I think my message to the public is just thanks. Thanks for the support. You read often that farmers are the most trusted part of the supply chain. The highest percentage of trust is in farmers rather than processors or supermarkets. And I just want to say thank you to those members of the public who do support British farmers and who do use the countryside responsibly. Often we focus on the people who don't. And we all know things about, problems with dogs and livestock and all those kind of things. And, we going back to what you've just said about positivity, Ben, and trying to focus on that, we very much sort of focus on perhaps bad trade deals and bad policy.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately the public do support farmers. And whenever I speak to people who aren't farmers and I tell them I'm a farmer, they're always really interested. They always want to know more about it, what we do, where they can buy our produce. So I just want to say, I guess, thank you to those people because it's hugely appreciated.
And your message to farmers?
Just keep going. Just keep going. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't focus too much on the sort of the anti-farming message. It is a tiny minority. You'd think sometimes you open social media and things that, the whole world's against us. And I understand why, but the vast majority of people are supporting us. Farming is the biggest job on earth. We're part of something really, really important, really special. Try and focus on that and keep going and keep doing what you're doing.
Brilliant. We will leave it there. But thank you, Will, for coming on doing this. It's been, like I said at the beginning, there's no one I would rather have done this with. So thank you.
Thank you. But before you go, I just want to say thank you to you, actually, because I think what you do with this, and you're such a brilliant communicator. You are such a star with this podcast, and I know that you put a huge amount of time and effort into it. People, as someone who's done podcasts, it takes up a big part of your life, and you do this, and you care about farmers, and you care about the industry and the community, and I think what you're doing is incredible, and you deserve every success with it. And thank you for doing everything that you do.
Oh well. You make me emotional. Thank you. That's very kind. That is it for this week. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. Please also leave us a review. I would love to hear more, and just any feedback on either guests that you'd like to have on the show. If you're interested in coming on the show, get in touch. Contact us on social media. We're at MTF_podcast on most social media channels. I'm actually taking a week off next week, which hasn't happened for a while. So I'll see you the following week. But a big thank you from me to you all for continuing to listen to the show week in, week out. It's been fantastic to see so many new listeners. We're continuing to grow. So please tell your neighbours if they don't listen to the show already. Get more people involved, because this is what it's all about. Getting farmers together and telling farming stories from farmers. So please continue to spread the word and tell other farmers about it. A huge thank you also to our primary podcast sponsor, A-Plan Rural Insurance, for supporting the show. Thank you to them for coming on earlier this year. Very exciting. Very excited to see what we can do with them going forward. Please see the show notes for more information and for any links mentioned today. For now, though, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.